If you feel like you're spreading yourself too thin, that you're busy but you're not necessarily doing the things that are important to you, then in this video I'm going to take you through an approach and a philosophy that will help you focus in on what's really important so that you can do the things that matter to you and live a life where you feel you have purpose and meaning. So the approach is called Essentialism, and I discovered the approach through Greg McKeown, and I will link to the book down in the description because it's well worth a read if this is interesting to you. So Essentialism is an approach and a philosophy that isn't about getting more things done, it's about getting the right things done. One of the phrases that Greg McKeown uses is doing less but better. And this isn't necessarily easy because we all tend to have competing demands and it's easy to get pulled into doing things that are non-essential. So Greg McKeown explains that in order to cultivate an essentialist mindset, there are three entrenched assumptions that we need to overcome. The first one is replacing I have to with I choose to. The second one is it's all important, and replacing that with only a few things really matter. And the third assumption to replace is I can do both, replacing it with I can do anything but not everything. And we're going to go through these a bit deeper now. So the first one, I choose to, is about the power of choice. Do you ever feel like you don't have a choice? Have you ever given away your power by choosing to do what someone else has told you to do? And whilst we might be faced with a lot of things in life that we have no control over, we do still have a choice. And I think knowing that on its own can help us to feel more in control. The danger of putting yourself in a position where you believe you don't have choice can leave you to feeling helpless and powerless, and you might end up doing things for other people which aren't really what you want to do. So moving on to the assumption of only a few things really matter. Greg McKeown invites us to think about, is there a point at which doing less but thinking more will help you produce better outcomes? And this one I do find a bit tricky myself, because often it feels like I don't have a lot of time to sit and think. I'm on a treadmill of trying to get things done. But Greg McKeown talks about the essentialist mindset as being that most things are actually non-essential. And the key thing is for us to be able to scan and see what things are essential and those that aren't so essential, the things that we really don't need to get involved with. And the third assumption of I can do anything but not everything, this is another one that I've fallen into the trap of my need for multitasking and thinking I can do lots of different things at once, or that I can take on more work than I can actually handle. The reality is that when we say yes to one thing, we are actually saying no to something else. There is always going to be a trade-off. We can't do everything. And this is where the intentionality comes in, a bit like minimalism, where we think about our intention to purchase certain things and have certain things in our home. Essentialism is that process where we think more intentionally about what we do. So if we commit ourselves to one thing, what impact is that going to have on the other things that we're doing or the other things that we might want to do? It's not to say that there is a right or wrong answer between the things we choose to do and the things we don't, but it's just having an awareness that when we do make a choice to do one thing, other things are going to be impacted by that. So now you know about the essentialist mindset, I'm going to take you through some ways that you can implement this into your everyday life. In terms of how we can start separating those trivial many and focusing on the vital few, the first thing you can do is having space to figure out what matters. So this means setting up a quiet space, a time where you're not interrupted, where you can actually think about this. Remember that a lot of times we are on this treadmill of doing, and it doesn't give us that time to really think about things in a lot of detail. So we need to create a time and a space where we can do this properly. So it might be that you set aside a period of time on a certain day where you're going to be more quiet, you're not going to be distracted with other things, where you can think about how you're going to spend more time on the things that are essential to you. But the second tip is, once you've set aside that quiet time, you want to use it to think about, okay, what are all the things that I've got going on in my life? What are the things that really are non-negotiables? They're things that are really important to me. What are the things that I'm doing that, I'm spending a lot of time on those things and really they're not that important, or they're not adding anything into my life, and maybe they're even taking away from it. Greg McKeown talks about play as being another way that we can figure out what's essential and what's non-essential. As adults, I think we're not very good at allowing ourselves to play and have fun and be creative. I think as we grow up, we kind of move away from that and we think we've got to be serious because that's how life is. Being able to tap into our creativity, I think it helps us to see things from a different perspective. Greg McKeown also talks about how play can actually help with things like planning and analysing. So if we're trying to think more about how we spend our time, then maybe we need to go out and have a bit of fun. I know myself that that going out walking in nature, it's a huge stress reliever for me. I find something about that process. It helps me to tap into something else in my brain about if I'm trying to solve a problem or think through something. I don't know, it just helps me to get a lot clearer about things. So maybe if you're feeling overwhelmed, maybe do something a bit different that takes you out of the norm. Do something different to stimulate those other areas of the brain that might help to give you a different perspective. Greg McKeown also talks about sleep. Sleep, I think, is really underrated. I know that in the past I have worked until the late hours, got up at the same early time in the morning, and I've really suffered for it. Getting enough sleep is actually going to help you be more productive. If you are trying to juggle certain things and you're struggling, it might actually help you to do that. But obviously we do still want to think about whether some of the things you're juggling are essential or whether some of these things you can let go of. So this next one, Greg McKeown calls be selective. And this is one I have a bit of trouble with, I must admit. So he talks about making your selections as using the phrase, if it's not a hell yes, then it's a no. If it's not an absolute strong yes, then you say no to it. Whilst at the beginning, whilst I read Greg McKeown's book, I thought, yep, that makes real sense to me. I do think it's more nuanced than that. I don't necessarily think we can apply that to everything. But equally, we come back to that process of making trade-offs. So if you go into the decision-making process fully aware that saying yes to something means you're going to be saying no to something else, that's fine. But equally, when you say no to something, you are opening yourself up to saying yes or being able to say yes to something else. So the second part is called eliminate, and this is about how to cut out the trivial many things that we might be doing that really we don't need to do. The first aspect of this, Greg McKeown talks about being clear on your purpose. So when you're unclear about what your purpose is or what your goal is in this thing that you're doing, this can cause stress and frustration because you've got nothing to aim for. If you don't know that, you're likely going to be kind of almost like treading water or spinning your wheels a bit because you've got no direction. The next tip, Greg McKeown calls the power of a graceful no. There have been many times where I've said yes to things when actually I just really wanted to say no, but I got caught up in feeling bad about it and not knowing how to say no in a way that wasn't rude or dismissive of the other person. Greg McKeown recommends a few ways that you can reframe or think differently about your views of saying no. Try to separate the decision from the person. So saying no to somebody isn't about denying the person, it's about denying their request. Go back to focusing on the trade-off. If you say yes to what this person is asking, what are you saying no to? And he also says that you don't actually need to say the word no. There are different ways that we can say no without actually saying it. One way is, I can't do that right now, but I would love to do it at a later date. Or you could say that I'm really grateful that you asked, but at the moment I'm overcommitted. Or if you needed a bit of time to think about it, you could always say, let me check my calendar and I'll get back to you. This next one is really relevant for me as well. So having the courage to quit or uncommit. Greg McKeown talks about what's called the sunk cost bias. And this is when you continue to invest time or money or energy into something you know that is a losing proposition. The further in you go, the more you invest in it, the more you feel like you have to get to the end of it. And quitting tends to come with negative connotations, and that's probably why I didn't, because I thought, well, maybe people might think badly of me or think badly of myself. But if we reframe it to uncommitting, what we're doing is making an intentional decision to say, this thing that I have spent a lot of time and energy and perhaps money on is not something I'm interested in anymore. It's not adding value to my life. It's not important for me. So I'm gonna choose to uncommit from it. If I'm saying no to this thing, it opens me up to say yes to something else which I would perhaps rather spend my time, money and energy on. Greg McKeown also talks about setting boundaries. And this is something I have got better at as I've got older, but it can still be hard. But boundaries are really important. Again, they help us to not get pulled into doing things that we really don't want to do so that we can focus on the things that really do matter to us. And one of the most important things I think is that we get clear on what our boundaries are before we're put in a position where those boundaries might be tested. If you think you might be asked to do a particular thing at some point in the future, get clear in your own mind about whether that is something you want to do or whether it's something you can't commit to at the moment. And then you might want to rehearse how you're going to say no to that thing. I found for me that rehearsing has been really helpful in terms of keeping my boundaries in place and not feeling too bad about saying no. The third part of putting the essentialist mindset into practice is execute. So life is unpredictable. Things get thrown up at us that we don't necessarily expect, and we can plan for certain eventualities. I don't believe we can plan for every eventuality, but planning ahead isn't necessarily a bad thing because it helps us to think about, okay, what am I going to do if this thing happens? How can I deal with it? That can give us a sense of sort of more security and control, but just remembering that we can't control everything in life. The second aspect of execute is subtraction. What are the obstacles in your life that are slowing you down? What are the things you're doing that are keeping you back from the things that are really important to you? By removing these obstacles, you're more able to reduce the friction of what's keeping you from achieving what you want to achieve or the way that you want to live your life. We don't necessarily know what the obstacles are until we know what our overall goal and purpose is. So once you're clear on that, then you'll be able to start identifying the things that might be getting in the way of you achieving those goals. And then you can think about what to do about them. The next tip is called progress. Greg McKeown says that non-essentialists want to go big on everything, that they think that the more they strive, the more they will achieve. Whereas essentialists focus on the small wins, small steps, the small habits that they can work on in order to move closer to their overall goal. Essentialists don't waste time trying to get everything perfect. They focus on getting things done and making sure they keep moving forward. They keep the bigger picture in mind. And if we're thinking about this in terms of living the life that we want, you might want to think of it of not sweating the small stuff, keeping in mind your overall goal for your life or your vision for your life, and making sure that the small steps you take are in alignment with that. Another aspect of execute is flow. This is routines and habits. I personally think that routines are really important because when we get into a routine, we don't have to think so much about it. We just do it. It just comes more naturally and we don't question it. We don't overthink it. What we don't want to do is get stuck into routines that aren't actually helpful for us, like spending a lot of time on social media that more than likely takes us away from a lot of the more important things in life. So whether it's spending time with friends or family, doing an exercise routine, going out walking in nature, getting into a routine of doing that reduces that friction and it increases the likelihood of you actually continuing with that thing. The next tip in terms of executing essentialist mindset is focus. So thinking about what's really important to you now at this moment in time. It's not to say that these things won't change over time, they probably will, but what's important to you right now? And depending on what your answer is, then have a look at the things that you're doing in life. Do all of these things align with that focus, or are some of them actually non-essential? Can you let some of them go? Do you need to do less of them? Are there things you need to do more of if you want to align with what's really important to you? And the final part of execute is be. A bit like minimalism, you could think about essentialism as something you do occasionally, as almost like a task. I don't necessarily know if that's possible. Being essentialist, it's a part of your life. It's a mindset. It's a way of thinking that influences different areas of your life. If you compare it to decluttering in the minimalist mindset, what you're doing is decluttering all of the things that no longer have a use. You're clearing the way for things that actually do matter in your life. You're editing down your life to being the essential things that bring value. They add to your overall sense of purpose. They give you satisfaction. You get fulfillment out of them. When our lives are so cluttered like they are with stuff, it's hard to see what's really important. But when we start to whittle those things down, your life will become richer for that. You don't need your life crammed full of things to be meaningful and full of purpose. And if we really get honed in on what's really important, it can feel more meaningful even though there might be less in it. Let me know in the comments what you think about it. Do you think it aligns well with minimalism? Are there things that you do which you think are essentialist in nature that maybe you didn't realize you were doing? Another philosophy that I think really helps us to hone in on what's important in life is slow living. And if you'd like to find out how slow living could change your life, then click on the video that's on the screen. Thanks so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon.